Welcome to Putting It Together, the podcast that goes through the entire body of work of Stephen Sondheim, show by show and song by song. My name is Kyle Marshall, your self-described Sondheim expert. As I just outlined, yes, this show is designed to be about the career of Stephen Sondheim, the songs of Stephen Sondheim, but every once in a while, or every once a month, what we like to do is we like to sit down and talk about something that might not necessarily be just about the man himself. And this time, what we're going to be doing is talking to a person who's been on the show before and has an upcoming show they think that people in New York and New York area should be trying to go and get tickets to. So welcome back to the show, Joel DeCandio.
Hi, thank you.
You already did a Sondheim show. Why a second one? I ask as a host of a podcast talking about Stephen Sondheim.
The first one, Ben Rimlauer, who kind of heads up the programming at Green Room 42, reached out to me towards the end of 2022 and asked if I would be interested in doing a show, a Sondheim show. And I said yes, and put it together really fast for myself and Bly both, and Adrian Reese. Adrian played piano and Bly and I sang. It was a very short sort of process. We threw it together really fast because of our schedules. It sort of I was asked to do this end of November, beginning of December, and our schedules, we sort of just had to do it. It had to be done in January. Right. So it was a really fast process, and it was about sexual politics and relationships and Sondheim's music. And the show, people really seemed to enjoy it. And I think it was sort of very different than a traditional cabaret format or a lot of the Sondheim concerts that you see in the city. I was asked a lot, are we going to do another one? And it was a lot of work to do the first one. So I sort of thought, probably not. I don't think I want to do this again.
I hope I'm not throwing you under the bus, and we can cut this out, I suppose. But I remember talking to you like off mic about that, and you're like, I don't want to do producing again. This is too much work. It's too stressful.
Exactly. No. That's exactly what it was. It was just a lot of responsibility that I didn't want. And so, but I think enough time went by. It's been about 1.5 years since we did it, over 1.5 years now, to where I guess I sort of forgot just how much stress and responsibility it is. And back in May of this year, Ben brought it up again. And at that point, I sort of had the idea for what this show would be. And then I was once I had the idea for what this one would be, I was excited about it. And so then I put it together, and now it's happening. And it'll probably be 2 years before I do this again.
I want to get into the meat of the show. But before we do, I think we should I was going to say do the hard sell, but that's not really quite what I want to say. We want to tell people when this is. So just as the overview, I know that it's happening at the Green Room 42.
Yes.
When, where can they get tickets, all that good stuff, so they know right now?
Yes. So it is happening Sunday, October 6th at 7 p.m. at the Green Room 42 in New York. And you can get tickets on the Green Room's website or the Green Room 42's website. Or if you follow me on Instagram, it's in my links. There's a ticket link in there if that's easier. That goes just directly to the show. And yeah, Sunday, October 6th at 7 p.m. It's an hour. Tickets start at $21. There's no food and drink minimum, which is nice. And yeah, it should be fun. It's a really cool sort of like classy contemporary venue. And it's a very small room, which is really nice. So it'll be very intimate.
If we do rewind a little bit, you did that first Sondheim show, like you mentioned, of sexual politics within Sondheim's work. What do you feel after having gone through that entire experience? Like, what did you learn about putting on a show? And maybe what did you learn about Sondheim too by going through that show?
It was a huge learning experience. I mean, the last show was filmed, and I watched it back after just to see how it went. And that was actually really helpful, just realizing, okay, there was one number that was in the show that like the week before the show, I was like, should I cut this number? I don't know. And then when I watched it, I was like, yeah, I should have cut that. Just didn't work like I was hoping it would in just the context. And so that was really helpful to sort of see how things flowed, see how things worked, see how audience responded to certain numbers. And that was incredibly helpful. And then building this show. And I think as far as just learning about Sondheim, it's one thing to sort of grow up with, so much of this music I know and already knew and grew up with. And then so I'm so very deeply familiar with all of his shows. It's totally different when you start to actually learn the pieces for performance and you realize, oh, someone is waiting from company. I have, since I was young, like sat at the piano and played and sang all the time. And I love the piece and I love company and I've seen it multiple times and heard it. And then when you're actually practicing it for a performance, you realize, oh, these lyrics are really hard to keep track of. There's a lot of names. There's a lot of names, and it's always trying to figure out whose name is next. And actually, when we did the show last year, specifically for that number, I did have a cheat sheet on the floor of the stage that had the names of all the women in order, so that I didn't, because I didn't trust myself on short notice to get all of them in there.
Get all, yeah. I think there's a similar thing too with, I think you did poems from Pacific Overtures.
No, There Is No Other Way.
Oh, There Is No Other Way. Yes, you're right. There Is No Other Way, which is like, there's just a lot of like aphorisms or something like that you have to go through, that if you don't get them in the right order.
Yeah.
You were able to watch back your performance and stuff like that. This time you have a little bit more time. So like, where do you start? You open up the entire songbook and you start throwing darts at it, or like what was the underlying theme that you wanted to go with?
So it started with the idea of just presenting a very intimate Sondheim evening at the piano, because I play the piano and I did not play last year. I had Adrian play, and especially because last year was sort of the first one, it was really helpful to have Adrian there supporting on the keys, and then Blythe with me singing. So I just didn't feel, alone in this.
Was there a reason though last time that you decided not to play the piano?
I don't love playing for myself in performance, because I'm then parallel essentially to the audience. And so I feel like, especially for Sondheim, for numbers like this, I want to be able to like talk directly to you. I want to be able to connect in that way. So that is why I generally avoid it. I don't like it. I've grown up playing and singing. It's very easy for me, and in some ways easier to play and sing stuff than it is to work with the other pianists, because then I'm fully in control of everything, in the moment. But it's not as fun for me, because then I can't directly focus with the audience. And this one sort of came out of necessity, because Adrian is off doing the company tour right now, and Bly is off doing a show for the next couple months. So I didn't really want to put together a new team for it. And I thought, okay, well, this will be, people do seem to like when you play and sing at the same time. I think that, entertains people. We've sort of been strategic about figuring this out, and the placement of the piano to where I can still sort of connect with the audience. And instead of having like a handheld, or not a handheld, but just a normal mic on a stand in front of me, it's going to be a body mic. So because I move a lot when I play, and I can turn to them. And so then I don't have to feel like I have to focus right into the mic in front of me. So I think it will work. And also, there's a challenge in it too, of having to play all of this music, some of which I've grown up playing, but some of it is new to me as a pianist and is very difficult.
Right. You need like the Elton John like turning turntable.
I know.
So that you can move your piano whenever you want to.
I'll ask Green Room to build a turntable for me for this.
You demand it, yes.
I think it'll be the last time I play there.
Do you feel like you have grown as a performer? I know it's been maybe just a year and a half, but I think that can sometimes be a lot of time for the individual. Do you think that you've grown as a performer in that year and a half?
Oh, for sure. I think it's going to be I don't want to say a very different show. I think stylistically, the way I perform and the sort of vibe of the last show is very present in this one, but I think this one's a lot more polished and a little sharper and a little smarter. And I think that with everything, theater for years, and the last handful of years I've been doing a lot of film, but I was just at a premiere last night of a film that I shot last year. And even, just looking at that, I think I'm pretty good at being objective about my performance and saying like, okay, that is good. That is not, and I was watching it and I just thought like, oh, okay, I know better now. I would do that different. I would do that different. Still, it's still like it was,
Hmm.
still pleased with what it was. But I think a year is still a very long time. Even less than that, I think at least I'm always sort of constantly trying to grow and fix things and change, fine tune things as an actor, and as a vocalist and a performer in general, as a pianist. So yeah, I think a lot is different in the way I perform now than I would have a year and a half ago.
So I'm the most familiar, I guess, with your work doing this type of thing, like a concert where you're
Hmm.
conceiving of it and performing in it. I do know that you're also an actor, so you're being directed by other people.
Hmm.
Do you have the itch inside of you? Could you do a show where you were all behind the scenes without being in the forefront?
I haven't music directed in years, but I used to. I've lived in New York for 10 years, but prior to that, I lived in DC and I worked at
Hmm.
Signature, which is a
Oh,
place that does
right.
a lot of Sondheim. And I used to music direct there. They have a big cabaret series there that sort
Hmm.
of runs through the year. And so I used to music direct a bunch of those. That was sort of the last time I music directed. I mean, it's been over a decade. Not so much my interest.
Which is impossible because they think you're 22. So,
Yeah, very, very much not. But thank you. But I don't really have any interest in. I've helped other actors out with cabarets and putting stuff together. I think I'm good with set
right.
lists and flow and stuff, and sort of figuring out like why are we doing this? What are we sharing here with the audience? But I think as far as directing, I don't have a whole lot of interest in it. I have been asked by film friends about directing film, and I don't know how I would feel about directing like a feature, but I think it would be cool to do a short if the right thing if it was the right
Right.
thing and I felt like I really had something to say with it and knew exactly what I wanted to do. So that's come up. And I've been doing a little more producing in that world too, which is very new to me. But I really enjoy that.
Not to make this all about me, but talk about it. I've stepped into producing a friend's short film right now, and there's
Yeah.
a lot of stuff that you have to
Yeah.
like balance and like spin plates on.
It's funny. When I shot my first film, I said to the director one day, I was like, so like I know they do a lot, but what do the producers like? What is I don't understand. Like, what does a producer do? What is their job? And he was like,
Hmm.
everything. And I'm like, that doesn't help me. I don't understand.
Yeah, that's not helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, but it is kind of true. They do sort of do everything.
Oh my gosh, yeah. It's just like, oh my, another thing that I hadn't even thought of. I guess, yeah, someone has to do
Yeah.
that or figure that out. This is probably an impossible question. It's been rallying around in my brain here recently. With Sondheim's passing, of course, there was like this flurry of doing revivals and doing special concerts and stuff like that. What do you feel is like this, the vibe, the take, the feeling around Sondheim shows currently? Merrily We Roll On, of course, is like this huge runaway success.
Mhm.
But outside of that, like, what is the appetite, do you feel, of Sondheim's work in the canon?
It's so funny because we know this to be true for all artists. Like once they pass, all of a sudden,
Hmm.
everyone is enamored with their work and it's amazing. And Sondheim has
Right.
always been, I think, this major figure. I would say the greatest composer lyricist in theater. I mean, for me, he really bridges the gap between sort of the golden age and contemporary musical theater. So I think he's always been regarded as this major innovator and this major force. So people have always loved and admired his work, but his work has never been. He's never had like major commercial hits. He's not writing. He didn't have a Phantom of the Opera or a Wicked
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
that ran for an extremely long time. But I think, particularly in the theater community, there's a lot of love and reverence for his work. And so when he passed, obviously there's been a resurgence. And I think that's twofold. I think it's, people in the theater community who just love his work and want to share it and feel very overwhelmed or moved by his passing, and feel like now is the time we want to share this. And also then of course there's speaking frankly, there's the monetary side of, people
Yeah.
who put on these shows and say, okay, well, he's passed now, so we're going to put up his show because this will make money. That's just how things work.
Yeah. How the business
Yeah,
works, right?
exactly. So I think it's sort of both of those factors. I also think, I don't know, it's interesting. I've talked about this with people before. If you look at where we thought the industry, where we thought musical theater was going over 10 years, like 15 years ago, it was going in a very, I would have thought it was going more in the Jason Robert Brown, Adam Gettle sort of direction,
Right.
the sort of progeny of Sondheim. And it took a big shift a handful of years ago where it went in more of a pop direction. And I think that's always been surprising for me because if like I said, if you looked 15 years ago, it seemed like we were going in a different direction. And now we're going in a more pop world, which is totally cool and just very different. And it makes sense because musical theater is always contemporary, right? Musical theater is always current. It's always sort of within the current cultural zeitgeist. That's one of the big differences between musical theater and opera is that musical theater musically formally changes with the time very distinctly based on sort of like what's happening in the music world. It's always popular.
Which is why I feel it's somewhat weird that there hasn't been more hip hop musicals, to be honest with you, on Broadway. Like, I get it because of like the majority of people who still go are like rich white people, but still at the same time, you would think that would have seeped in a little bit more than it has already.
I think it is tried to, but I think there is a very big divide in those two audiences. And there is an overlap, obviously, that we can see with Hamilton. But I also think Hamilton is sort of an outlier in that I think it's been difficult to figure out how to make that work stylistically for people, probably. And also, I think a lot of the new musical theater writers who are writing now were very influenced. A lot of the people who are writing now were very influenced by 90s, 2000s pop music. That's what a lot of them really grew up on. And so I think that's a big factor in it too. And I'm sure as time goes on, we'll start seeing more hip hop musicals and stuff like that. But I think that's just going to take longer. I mean, look how long it took for us to get, Rent, which premiered in the 90s, but rock music has been around for decades before that. And it wasn't, so massively popularized in musical theater until much later. So I think that it's just going to take time for something like that.
The other thing I'm becoming obsessed with, there's a previous guest who was on the show and we had this conversation about like what the future of musical theater is. And of course, this is all like us guessing and we'll all probably be totally wrong. But I think a pretty obvious fact that people's attention spans are getting shorter and trying to grab people and bring them in, whether it's a film or a live show, play, whatever it happens to be. Yeah, people's attention spans just cannot be held for as long as they used to be. Do you think that the intermission as it stands now is going to feel so antiquated relatively soon? You know what I mean? Like in film, the last like real intermission I think happened in the 80s. It was like the mid 80s, the last time a film was actually released with an intermission. Do you feel like musicals are going to start to be changed in how they're written to be like, we are one act, we're 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours, no intermission?
I hadn't ever really thought of that before, but yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, I could very easily see that happening. I think I've seen more and more one act musicals popping up over the few years. So I could certainly see that happening. At the same time, I mean, I know there are new musicals that have premiered recently this season that have been very long. Overly long,
right.
and have people have said, okay, stuff needs to be cut. So I think that's still happening. I think that's probably a ways off, but that makes sense to me. I could see that happening more. No intermission shows. I love a 90-minute show.
Sometimes they're great. Yeah. We're talking about Assassins right now, talking about like a no intermission show.
For sure,
usually,
Passion,
at least.
For me, if it's 2 hours or under, like let's power through.
Yeah, right. So I guess getting back to the show that you are creating here, and when this goes up, it'll be in like just over a week. Not that you have to spoil all the surprises or anything like that, but like what songs can we expect to hear in this?
So there's only couple that were in the show last year. I think over three-quarters of the show is new material for me. There are some favorites in there.
Hmm.
The sort of second half of the show is a lot of favorites. I'll say that. The first half of the show is going to be a lot of, I don't want to say lesser known stuff. There is some lesser known stuff, but also just stuff that you don't generally see in Sondheim concerts, which I'm
Hmm.
really excited about. And there are some instrumentals. So one of the things that people I noticed really liked in the last show, the one last year, was that in the middle of the show we had sort of an interlude. I wanted to give Adrian a feature because it was very much, I considered it like a three-person show. And so he played this arrangement of No One Is Alone that was, I think it was Fred Hirsch's arrangement that was made for Anthony DeMar, who is a concert pianist. He
Yeah.
had this two-disc album called Liaisons, which was all these major contemporary composers who reimagined arrangements of Sondheim for the piano. And he recorded all of
Great
them.
album, by the way.
Yes.
I listen to it a
He
lot.
also actually he has a new one coming out. He has two more discs of it, of
What?
more
Okay.
arrangements, yeah, coming out. So, and I think that's coming out soon. Yeah, so that was something that was featured in the middle of the show, was this piano arrangement of No One Is Alone, and people seemed to really, really like it. I think it was a nice sort of reprieve from the singing, and also sort of it gave essentially a built-in intermission, not an intermission,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
like it sort of had the show. So there was Act One and Act Two. Is how I thought about it. And so because people liked that, I programmed that a little more this year. And there's actually one, two, I'm looking at my set list, three, four. There's four instrumentals in the show. One is Night Waltz 2 from
Mm.
Little Night Music. One is actually an instrumental that I made from an arrangement that was in the last show. So in the last show, Bly and I sang a duet of Joanna and There Is No Other Way, which is the arrangement you were
Yeah.
talking about earlier, which sort of overlays Joanna and There Is No Other Way. And this year, it's going to be in the show still, but in a purely instrumental form. It's going to be a piano solo, which I think will be really beautiful. And then there are two other instrumentals in the show.
Here's the thing. Having done this podcast now for like just over 6 years or so, I've developed a lot of theories. And my big theory that I've really become like entrenched in is that the secret sauce to Sondheim is like, yes, everybody knows his lyrics and he's known as like the big lyric guy. But I think that means people sleep on his actual musicianship, his actual like compositions themselves. And I don't think would be as memorable if it wasn't those lyrics tied to the music that he wrote for it. Because I think a lot of his pieces work just as well, like you said, like just as a piano piece or just as an instrumental piece without the lyrics put on.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the double whammy is of course emotional and like amazing for me, but I think that's the secret sauce. Like the music by itself is very, very good.
I love that you say that for two reasons. One, that was something that was very important to him, was that he was taken seriously as a composer and not just
Yeah.
as a lyricist. And I remember when Anthony first did his Liaisons project, where he commissioned all these contemporary composers to create arrangements of Sondheim's music. Sondheim was so moved by it because he felt like, there are serious musicians, serious classical and contemporary musicians who take my composition seriously.
Yeah.
And so that was really important to him. And the other reason I'm really happy you say that is because that's what the show is about. It is a focus on his music. So that's why it's called Sondheim at the Piano. And I am at the piano. And essentially what happened when I was developing this show was that it really became about the music and about the motifs, specifically the musical themes that he weaves in and out of his music. So it is a concert, but it is also sort of, I have to think of a different word because this is not an exciting word, but sort of a lecture, like it's very analytical. So there's music and then
Come to Joel's musical
yeah,
lecture,
exactly.
everybody.
There's a lot of discussion about like, okay, so he created this theme and it means this, and this is how it works in the music, and this is how it's brought back in the show, and stuff that you don't know about. And I guess, okay, I will say one thing, because there's my favorite part of the show, which I just nerd out about, I'm really
Yeah.
excited about. And it's not so much a secret because I have been talking about it, but there is, in the middle of the show, there is a sort of a suite that we're doing from Passion. And it's the one time where I have a guest come up for the show, and it's Britt Hewitt, who is this amazing Juilliard trained soprano. She's stunning. She's a composer as well. She's just brilliant. And she's going to sing It's Clara and Giorgio, and they're sort of letters back and forth. And so this really gorgeous suite she's going to do with me. It's my favorite part of the show, but it's also the hardest part of the show because Passion is really, really hard to play. But I think I've also made a really gorgeous arrangement of the score in it, I hope. But one of the coolest things I discovered while I was putting this show together was that, do you know Passion well, or you know all his shows. It takes place on an Italian military base. And so Sondheim uses bugle calls a lot, Italian bugle, like military bugle calls. So the main one that you hear throughout is this da-da-dum, ba-da-bum, bum, bum, ba-da-bum, bum, bum. And that triad, that ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, that becomes the theme that plays underneath Happiness through the whole show. Ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum. And you don't really realize it because it's not a bugle doing it. It's orchestrated differently, and then there's dissonance put under it, so it sort of hides that it's the bugle call, but it is the bugle triad just over and over and over through the whole show, just on a loop. And that sort of makes up a big part of this suite, is this bugle call underneath them, constantly sort of like pulling him away from her back to camp. So that is one of the things that we talked about in the show, and it's also my favorite part of the show.
Did you know that before this concert series, or is this something you discovered?
And it is my favorite Sondheim, alongside Night Music. I would say Passion, Night Music, and Sweeney, but probably Passion is my favorite. And I sang a bunch of stuff from it when I was in college, way back. And so I've been very deeply familiar with the score for a long time. And I never realized until that I was working on this show that it was the bugle call. And that's because when I went to put together this show, I went back to, there's a book called Sondheim on Music, and it's by Mark Eden Horowitz, who is a senior music specialist at the Library of Congress. And he was my mentor when I was in DC, essentially. Like I still talk to him about anything Sondheim related whenever I have questions. And he's just brilliant. He's sort of my go-to authority on that. And in the book, that is something that he and Sondheim discussed. And I went back and sort of read and highlighted through the whole book when I was putting the show together to make sure I hadn't like forgotten anything or missed anything. And that was something that I sort of rediscovered when I was putting this show together. And so that's where that came from.
Yeah. This is probably a bit of an overshare, so apologies to people listening and to you as well. But like, Passion is the show that I actually have to intentionally avoid sometimes, because a lot of times I listen to my music on shuffle. Mm-hmm. There are certain songs that if they come up, it's like I become very emotional about, like I start to cry.
Yeah, I understand that. It is a really heavy show. It is so sort of relentlessly oppressive and dark and heavy, which is one of the reasons I love it. But it is one that you sort of have to be careful how much you listen to it, because it does really, it does really put a damper on things.
Yeah, starting to hang out with friends who's like super depressed, like, hey, everyone, I'm going to go write this letter by candlelight.
Incidentally, speaking of Passion, I just watched the movie recently, Passione d'Amore, the Ettore Scola's film that it's based off, and read the novel Tarqueti's Fosca. Both, I absolutely love them both. And I don't know if I love them so much specifically because I love the musical so much, but I just really enjoyed both of them. So
I'm so glad you said that, because I guess this is a revelation for people that are listening along. I'm going to be doing both of those things too before the Passion season. I want to read the source material, and I want to actually watch the movie that was the inspiration of it, just because I want to fill in all those gaps.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah. And I will say, one of the things that really struck me with the film, and then we can move on to this. Sorry, now I'm like geeking out about film. But one of the things that really struck me with the film was the portrayal of Fosca, because, we're so used to, I have Donna Murphy sort of ingrained in my mind, which is this very sort of dark, heavy, brooding version. And the woman who plays Fosca in the film if you close your eyes, if you don't watch, she sounds just like, just like a Clara or just any other woman. Like she's not sitting in it really heavily. She really is you really get the sense that this is just like another girl, but who is unfortunately very afflicted. And that was really it was the first time I sort of saw Fosca as just another ordinary girl, but who unfortunately is terribly afflicted in this way.
Yeah. And actually, I think so. There's of course like the original film that Sondheim was inspired by, and like that's what the source material comes from. But the actual filmed version that's on stage that you can find and watch, I think was shot on film, if I'm not mistaken.
The original Broadway production.
Yeah.
Wild. Wait, I'm gonna
I could be making that up, and now I feel like that is not true. But I felt I read that somewhere.
That seems crazy, but also it was 1994, so like that's very possible.
Maybe that's a rumor that I'm now perpetuating, but I thought that's what I heard. As we move into kind of like wrapping up this conversation, one thing that I do want to hit on that we've already discussed is like those hidden themes and stuff within Sondheim's music. Again, this is part of the greatness for me, of going through this show and so sequentially. I think the easiest one out there is like, like there's the bean theme inside of Into the Woods, and you can kind of hear that and sprinkle through. And then after doing that season, is like, it's actually in there far more than you even think it is. There's the very obvious ones, and then there's the not so obvious ones that are very much hidden and put in at very specific moments, and discovering those is so gratifying to see. Same with like Sunday in the Park with George has some arpeggios and stuff that are hidden inside of different songs.
Sunday in the Park with George is particularly amazing because I don't actually talk about it in this show because I just didn't have room, but all the themes that sort of comprise Sunday are then put together in Move On at the end. Right. It's like a conglomeration of all the themes sort of at once, which is just really cool. And sort of this musical idea of what Georges Seurat was doing with his paintings, piecing all these things together. And something actually that I read when I was going back through Mark's book was that, we think of, if you watch Sunday in the Park with George, we think of what George was doing with, dots, like the pointillism and just these
Yes, right.
But they're actually, someone was saying, they're actually not dots. They're like very slow, deliberate brushstrokes. And he said that wasn't very exciting to musicalize. So he sort of changed it in the show to be dots, so that he can musicalize it in that way.
That's so funny. It's like he's like that much of a stickler for for realism. I guess what I'm working my way up to saying here, it's not like that doesn't happen with other composers. Other people use themes and drag them through the entire score. But talking about that pop influence on Broadway, I think something that I sometimes miss is that feeling that there's like this theme that someone is wrestling with musically, and then piece through the score, where often I find it's like, these are like a collection of fun pop songs, but not necessarily like a theme that's being explored musically throughout the show. I'm not going to say that it's bad or that's where Broadway is going necessarily. It's just as a thing that I love. My bias is like, I just like that idea of something feeling cohesive rather than these are just a set of songs that we're going through.
I'm with you on there, and I think that is one of the reasons why I love his music so much, is because it feels so cohesive. The score is one whole sort of body of work. It's one of the reasons why I'm obsessed with Passion, because it really is what he describes it as, is one long rhapsody. It's one piece. It's one long piece. And I think, just coming from an acting standpoint, when you have these themes that come back, these recurring motifs, it really sort of builds the world for you that you're living in and that you're sharing. And one of my favorite terms in music, I think it's a literature term too, I'm not sure, but definitely in music, is the term idée fixe. Idée fixe, which is this French term for essentially like a leitmotif, like a theme, but like an obsession, like a fixated idea that occurs throughout the music and comes in and out. And I think that's very prevalent in a lot of his shows, certainly in Sunday, certainly in Passion. And I think it's one of the reasons why they're so dramatically compelling. And I think that music sort of works on you as an audience member, even if you don't know technically what is happening. If you don't understand, you can watch Passion and not know that is the bugle call, that it's
Right.
hidden in there,
Yeah.
but just hearing that theme, that sort of hypnotic theme come back all the time sort of puts you in a very specific world of the show, and it creates the mood and the tone. And so even if you don't know what's happening technically, it still works on you as an audience member. And I think it's just brilliant.
Well, Joel, thank you for taking time out of your day. I hear that there's a dog that you have to go and walk. So there's
I do. Got to go take care of the puppy.
Yeah. So once again, for people that are listening to this, it's called Sondheim at the Piano. It's a Green Room 42. It's October 6th is when the show actually is. So you can go pick up tickets right now. There'll be a link in the description of this podcast episode. And any last final thoughts or pitches that you want to throw to the audience, Joel?
I don't think so. I think just, I would love it if some Sondheim fans came out to see this show, because I have so much love for this music and I want to share it. And I'm really excited by sort of some of the things that I get to talk about and showcase in this show, just musically, and what he's created. I think it'll be really cool, and I think it'll be a really interesting evening.
Now, because this is a Sondheim adjacent episode, this might be the hardest thing I'm about to ask you, but you get to pick the song that plays us out. So,
I already know. Can it be Night Waltz 1? Can it be the Night Waltz from it's one of my favorite pieces of music. It was almost in the concert, but it was just a little too grand thematically for the rest of the show. But yes, can it be Night Waltz 1? I love it.
Just from the original Broadway, or is there a version that you like more than others?
You know what? Yeah, there's a recording of, I think it's John Mosseri. I'll send it to you, but it is from an album that he does with the Philharmonia Orchestra, just waltzes for musical theater, and it's this really grand version of the Night Waltz, which is very exciting.
Okay, now I'm excited to listen to that. Okay, great. And if people wanted to follow you online, is there a way you want them to do so?
Oh yeah, sure. I have an Instagram. That's my only social media. But it's just my name, JoelDecandio, just at Joel DeCandio, and that's it. That's the only one I have.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.